Chapter 4, study guide. It's in the module. You can fill it out, print it, and write it up if you want, and scan it, or you can just do it here. Some of the things, fill it in and save it, upload it. But I do, eventually want to get a copy of this study guide. So, chapter 4. So, this is how Mr. P's been spending his time. I've been playing Airplane Simulator, working on airplane engine. Anyway, chapter 4 study guide, they're online. Grade book's got to get filled in. No reason why you can't do the AUI in computing at home. Chapter 4 study guide can get turned in. Some of these chapter 1 labs never got done and are turned in. Not much you can do with, I think, some of the chapter 2 stuff, but packet tracers. No reason why those can't be done and turned in. Of course, that means you got to be reading your emails and trying to actually get something accomplished. All right, so one of the things in the study guide has to do with this question here. Talks about I can't remember exactly what question now, but it talks about a lecture and to get notes from a lecture. Well, that's kind of like what this is. And so what that was basically about was a lecture that we really already had when we were doing the security course. And that is IEEE 802.11i. So some of you, again, if you I don't know if I think I got the journals when I picked everything up, but this probably should already be in your journals. But anyway, when we talk about wireless, we talk about wireless security. Most people just think about it as, I got to turn on, AES, or I got to set my SSID. That is really only so that you can make the encryption work. So 802.11i is the IEEE open standard. It was built off of the Wi-Fi Alliance, which was a bunch of companies that got together when wireless first came out and said, hey, IEEE's dragging their heels, we got to come up with something. So they kind of developed their own. And then IEEE, of course, adopted a lot of it, about 98% of it, put their own 2% in, make it look like they were doing something. But it works kind of this way. I mean, it's really built on the 802.1x. And we talked a little bit about the 802.1x. It was a wired protocol, or used in a wired network, I should say. And it was a way to authenticate and authorize what people were allowed to do. So it kind of came from this EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol. Extensible means it's not done on the device. Right? So if it's done on the device, it's local. If it's done with servers, it's used with either Radius or Taxis. And we did a lab, I don't know if you remember, but we did a lab on Packet Tracer where we kind of set this up, and we did it through a switch. And, so you connect to the switch, the switch gets your frame, and it says, oh, wait a minute, I got to see if you're authorized, to be on here and to authenticate you. He then connects to the server, and sends along your, the server says, yeah, what do you want? I get somebody here who wants to be authenticated. Okay, have them send their username and password. Boom, you send that over there, and then they, either allow you to the port, to activate the port or not. Well, they took that same idea and they just said, well, why reinvent the wheel? It's already there. Let's just use that. But instead of connecting to a port, you were connecting to an access point. Now, all of that is done in unencrypted methods, unless you set it up to have encryption. So when you look at 802.1x in Wireshark, this is sort of like, I'm connecting. This is on I believe on a wired device. Here's the type of frame. It's an 802.1x frame I'm trying to connect, looking for the authentication. So when we talk about this, the person connecting is known as the supplicant. The authenticator is the device. Now, in a wired network, it's a switch. In a wireless network, it's the access point. And the authentication server, is where it's actually going to say yes or no. So the supplicant, says, hey, I want to start this thing. So he starts. We know the destination MAC address. That is where we're going to send this, where the authenticator, is going to send this back and forth. So he's going to say, all right, hey, I'm sorry, the destination would be the MAC address here, and then he's going to send it back saying, okay, you want to connect? Okay, I need the information. So what kind is this going to be? Well, username and password, identity. So that, once he gets that response, he sends that on to the authentication server. See, I can read all this. I can see, here's your identity. Here's your username. And I'm going to send that to the authentication server. And I'm going to say, all right, is that guy there? This is all in clear text. So that's why, we have to throw in on top. Now, on a wired network, that's okay, unless there's unless somebody can get in a connection in between these cables. That's why it's important to set these kind of things up, with a MAC, with our port security and all that kind of stuff. And, we don't need to worry so much about the encryption. But then, he'll send a challenge back to the supplicant, and the supplicant will send back, might say, okay, that's your username. What method do you want to use now? If we are, we are going to connect this, so I'm asking for, what kind of protocol do you want to use? And in this particular case, they're using something called PA. AP. Don't need to worry about that. But what would happen with ours is when it's going back and forth is you would use one of these encryption. So because we're going over wireless, we have to be a little more concerned about the passing back and forth of all of this information. If we leave it open, so I get authenticated, but if in part of my negotiation, if I just decide, hey, it's going to be open, all of that is just going to be in clear text. If part of this negotiation says, well, no, okay, here's the method we're going to use, and we need to throw in some encryption. So WEP was the original one, wired equivalency protocol, very easy to crack. Talked about that before. WPA is what is again not used much because the encryption is TKIP. Most people, when you set your wireless up, are going to use this. It's stronger encryption. Now, I can be open, right? In other words, allowing anybody in and still use some kind of encryption. We used to have in the school, we used to actually use WEP, and I'm sorry, not we used the WPA, but we were open, meaning that anybody could connect, but you still had to enter in a key in order to make the encryption work. So it was open, right? But it was encrypted. Now, that usually didn't happen, and the reason why they did that was to get around the remote authentication, like on our Active Directory. It's just too hard to have that many students. So I was like, hey, here's the SSID, because your radio needs that to connect, and then right here's what kind of encryption we're going to use. Well, it's going to be open. So you just connect on it, but then it did ask you for a key. The key really wasn't a password or anything. It was what we were going to use in encryption. All right. So that's what that part was about. It was just when we get into that section, talk about 802.11i. That is really almost the same as WPA and WPA2. Those are the encryptions that it uses. All right. First part of chapter 4, really complicated stuff. Talks about what makes a network, how networks communicate with each other, protocols that we use, how we do routing, what a LAN, a WAN, and all that stuff. But then we get to this part about the IoT protocols. So IoT protocols are going to have to take into account certain things when we do Internet of Things. So protocol, we're going to have different kinds of communication methods. We have to think about power and CPU pocketing, because these are not, even though like Raspberry Pi is pretty powerful, it's still not as powerful as maybe something that you would want to do. And it's going to have to interact with these servers and and all that kind of stuff. So there are some different protocols that we use, and one of them is called Constrained Application Protocol, based on HTTP. Get, put, post, and delete are we use, to go back and forth, and this is usually used in mobile connections. There's MQTT, message queuing telemetry transport, and we just have to kind of know, what it is. We don't have to know that much about it, but best suited, rely on low bandwidth, and require code with a small footprint. This is not like complicated, high-level stuff. Right. So this is a little bit what I was getting into. We're talking about securing. So we talk about our 3 A's: authentication, authorization, and of course accounting. This is what we call the trust relationship, right? And then that trust relationship is 2 things. Are you authenticated? Are you allowed? And then once you are allowed, where are you allowed to go? And that policy, based on these 2 things, has to be enforced. So how are we going to enforce that to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do? And then while people are on the network, while they're doing all this stuff, we got to make sure that how are we securing it? How are we detecting attacks, like IPS and ID? So that's all part of something when we talk about the Internet of Things, because, again, our networks are going to be placed out all over the world. They're not inside necessarily like a building, going all the way up and down roads. So that's the first part. Second part, a lot of wireless stuff. You got to know wireless stuff. There's one place that we're kind of always a little deficient in, I think, sometimes is, the wireless, the different types. So up here are the ones that we're more kind of, familiar with, the 802.11s. And then, of course, with phones, they usually kind of break it down into the 5Gs, but we get a little bit longer range. But if we really we have to go to these protocols, which you've probably never seen before, if you want to get to longer ranges. This is the one that you'll see a lot in wide ranging, like IoT devices that are, out there on telephone poles. So we kind of need to be a little bit familiar with this. There is Bluetooth 15.1, and there's Zigbee, which is 15.4, and wireless personal area networks 15.3. These are all based on protocols, just like these are all based on like 802.11s. All of these Bluetooth type things are all based on 802.15. So chart there that kind of fills it in and gives you an idea of what some of the ranges are. So the original Bluetooth 802.15.1, not that great speed, very short distance. Then we get to 15.4, which again is a different version, or developed by a specific name brand called Zigbee. 100 meters, 250 kbps. But 802.11, they say up to 54 megabits. That's we're not talking about 802.11 AC or anything like that. And then GSM, right, which is we're come across that later what GSM is. It's global satellite, I think. Sorry, global satellite. All right, so Zigbee, you'll see a lot because of some of the features that it has in IoT devices. Built on top of IEEE, branded Zigbee, just like with the Wi-Fi Alliance. They came up with WPA2, Zigbee, what you'll see a lot. Because it allows us to connect things wirelessly. And they are usually designed in, you should see, star mesh cluster. We have a coordinator, and then we have the devices. So in a star topology, the coordinator is going to be the sun and all the devices. But if these have to connect to each other in different networks, different IP, because they're going to need an IP address or some kind of address, you still have to have routers. So, but they are routers are not necessarily the kind that we use, but Zigbee routers that take Zigbee stuff and Zigbee networks and protocols and all that stuff. So they have different profiles, and the profiles are going to be based on different IDs, 16-bit number. And again, if you were getting more, how am I going to use this? Well, it's going to be used in a plant. Profile ID is going to be this. We use at a house, here. But if you notice, think about what's here. It's like these are different places that we would have intended uses for. And that's so that when you have that ID, that profile ID and all that stuff, different companies can build different stuff, and as long as they use that profile ID, they will be able to interact with each other. All right, then we get into good old buddy Bluetooth, which is 15.1, and since then, it has grown and does a lot more. Bluetooth 5, and back in 2016, and we're talking about 2 megabit bandwidth and distances that were up to 100 meters, whereas before, it'd be distances that were like 10 meters. A lot of this kind of came around like a lot of the original medical stuff was all done with 15.1. That's why in the old days, once you have your phone on, but now, when you interfere with the medical devices, again, now with the higher Bluetooth, that's kind of take care of, and they can filter that out. So the 4Gs and the 5Gs are cellular networks. You should be pretty familiar with those. Some of you own these things, smartphones. But then low WAN. So this is low power, wide area network. These are the kind of things, like I say, you're going to see outside when you want interaction, wireless devices, things like that outside. There are a couple of videos in here that are linked in the curriculum that deal with the low WAN. And then there's another one I meant to mention when we were back in security. It talks a little bit about, again, the advantages of your public place, you got wireless, and the middle attack, you can make sure you got things encrypted and all that kind of stuff. So take a look at those and give those a watch. I lost mine there. The range on the low WAN depends on the distance. So again, we're not talking high speed things here. So you got to think about it has great distance, right? And it is bi-directional, meaning it can send and also receive signals. But it is going to be limited because of the speed. So here's what I was talking about: the security, the 802.11, the EIP. And this was with the 802.11 architecture. So kind of read through this and see how that kind of interacts. And of course, they say, if you're going to be using this, especially over cellular networks or wireless networks, VPNs and stuff like that. But again, if you're using a third-party source for VPNs, better make sure that it's trustworthy. Otherwise, you're in a business or an enterprise, you have somebody working from home that's connecting, you set up your own VPN network. All right. So we get into cloud computing. The biggest thing with cloud computing is the different services. And, down the road, don't let Cisco say I said anything, but, Amazon AWS is a good cloud serving service. We have a lab that deals with this. This is kind of like another Google application. And it allows you to send stuff to the cloud so that you can interact with other devices. We actually set one of these up last year, toward the end of the year. I don't know if any of you remember, where from your home or your cell phone, you can actually turn on something that was in the classroom or turn it off by setting up an IFTTT. And then, WebEx Teams executed using RESTful APIs, which basically means, I send you a link, click on it, and we're connected to a server somewhere in the cloud, and we're basically, all this stuff that I'm doing, we're basically using protocols that are already built in to interact with each other, with our programmable interface. So fog computing, machine to machine, machine to people. Got to keep things that are necessarily I don't want airplanes landing and have to go up to some cloud and then all the way back. I want to keep those, the communication between the tower and them closer to each other. Just like when I am setting up even something in like a business, there are some things coming through, like with a drive-through here, and I have some communications going on. I want to keep that kind of local. You don't necessarily have to go all the way to the data center in the cloud. Now, eventually I will. I might send those stats all the way there, to store them. But in the initial communication, I want to keep that closer to where I'm at. So the last thing, data in motion, data at rest. Data in motion is like the stuff that, kind of like when we talk about things in the fog, it's stuff that is changing all the time. Data at rest is something like, okay, now I've sent it to the cloud and I want to save it, to analyze later on, and it's not going to be necessarily changed. So good video here that talks about what data in motion is. I'm not going to play it for you right now. You can play that at home. And, but again, data in motion, data at rest. What we keep data on, of course, as you know, growing all the time and exponentially between not necessarily personal data, but just stuff like, traffic lights, electricity usage, just road use on roads, just tons and tons. But all of this stuff is just zeros and ones until we can make it into something that we understand. That's where a lot of the big money is. All about the data. How can we take this stuff and make it into something that is worthwhile? So this is a neat packet tracer with the smart home, and hope you get a good look at that. Connected factory solution. I always have a little trouble with this. I haven't looked at it this year, but it's again, just kind of showing the difference between the kind of things you would do at home, kind of things that you would do, in a factory. And then lastly, with the data storage, where was I looking at? Maybe it was back. I'm sorry. I think I skipped over it in the cloud services. Okay. There was different kind of clouds, programmable storage services. I'm sorry, I'm lost here. All right. So that's the video. Kind of long, but there's a lot of stuff to cover. Somebody watches it.